Greetings and good afternoon. This is Pedro Noguera. I am the Dean at the Rossi School of Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our master class. We started the master class in this academic year as a way to bring together the Rossi community to address and to think about important issues facing our field. In the fall, I led the class along with my colleague, Dr. Mary Helen Imordino-Yang. This spring, we've had the pleasure of listening to Professor Gail Sinatra, who talked about science denial, and today, Professor Sean Harper, who's going to talk about racism denial. The topics we've chosen for the masterclass are topics that we believe cut across the field of education. That is, regardless of whether or not you're going to be a practitioner, a researcher, whether you are in our teacher ed program or our PhD program, the issues we're addressing in these classes are germane and quite relevant to the work you do. So we hope you'll tune in. We hope that others who are in the field, our graduates, those who work with us throughout the country are also tuning in because we think these issues are really important. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Sean Harper for our final master class of the semester. Dr. Harper is a university professor here at USC. He's also a provost professor of education and business. He's the Clifford and Betty Allen Chair of Urban Leadership, and he is the executive director of our Race and Equity Center. He's also the founder. Dr. Harper is one of the nation's most highly respected racial equity experts. He's been invited across the country and throughout the world to speak about how to address racism and racial inequality and injustice in a variety of settings, both in education and in corporations. He is well known for his books and articles. He's a member of the National Academy. He is a former AERA fellow. He is highly accomplished and a regular commentator on educational issues for the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Chronicle of Higher Ed, and maintains a regular column in Forbes magazine. Professor Harper is our final speaker for this series, and as you can see from the title, he's going to speak to us today about what we can do to address racism denial. Professor Harper, I'll turn it to you.
Dean Noguera, thank you so much for your brilliant, incredible leadership of our school. Thank you for being the brilliant mind behind this masterclass series. It's been such a way to bolster inclusion, intellectual inclusion across all of our academic programs for faculty, staff, and students. Honestly, it's been the highlight of my year as a member of the Rasir faculty. So thank you for thinking of the series and certainly for inviting Professors Imordino-Yang, Sinatra, and me to join you in this inaugural rollout of the masterclass series. I also appreciate that very generous introduction that you just gave me. Thank you so much. Well, hello, everybody. Sorry that our local school district is on strike. It is an important strike. I want people, educators in all capacities to make more money and to be paid what they deserve to be paid. But because of the strike, we had to make a pivot virtually. So let me take a moment to thank our colleague, Kanae Danley, for making this all possible, really. Kanae in Australia, on Kanae's team, had it not been for the two of them, we would not have been able to pull off the live in-person version of this, and certainly not the fully virtual pivot. So thank you, both Kanae and Australia. All right, so as Dean Noguera noted, Professor Sinatra and I, this semester in the masterclass series, have been talking about science denial and racism denial and what the two have in common. So we began the series, for those of you who might just be joining us for the first time today, we began the series by talking about what are these two denials and where did they come from? Why do people engage in these denial behaviors? So Gail went first by talking about what science denial is. I then talked about what racism denial is. Then Dean Noguera brought the two of us together for a really important conversation about the consequences, both for our broader society for our nation and for educational institutions of these two denials. Then 2 weeks ago, just before spring break, Professor Sinatra talked about what to do about science denial. I am here to close out the series today by talking about practically what to do in response to racism denial. I want to acknowledge that racism denial is not a totally new phenomenon. People have been attempting to pretend that there's no racism in this world for a long time. But I do want to situate my recommendations for the Rasir community in these political times. We are in a very specific political moment where there is a unique attack on telling the truth about America's racial past and present. So what do we do in these incredibly intense political times? Well, first, I would argue that we got to stick to the facts, we got to stick to evidence, and we have to stick to data. Ours is one of the leading research universities in the world. Ours is a school of education that values research, that produces research of the highest quality. So we ought to lean into what it is that we do best, and that is to rely on evidence, data, research, and facts. We have to also be clear and honest about what is and what is not happening as it pertains to the teaching of race in America's K-12 schools, as well as in our nation's post-secondary institutions. In addition to being the producers and the providers of evidence, we also have to demand evidence and data from those who are relentlessly and baselessly attacking the truth about America's racial past and present. So we have to meet, right, those critiques and that denial with a serious, unapologetic calling for them to provide actual facts and data of what's happening. We have to take advantage, I would argue, and I certainly invite you to take advantage of the USC Race and Equity Center's forthcoming resources. I'm going to talk with you about those in a moment, so there's a deliberate cliffhanger there. And lastly, we have to amplify the consequences for democracy, the consequences for our schools and educational institutions. I think that part of our response to these political times is to help people understand what is actually at stake as they attempt to minimize and erase any emphasis on race, racism, racial equity, and so on in classrooms, as well as in educator professional development and professional learning activities. I am going to, for the remainder of our time, walk us through each of these 5 response categories that I am recommending here. And I'm going to give you some concrete examples of, well, how do we do that? How do we stick to the facts? How do we demand evidence and data? All right, so let's start with a few facts, right? If indeed we are going to counter misinformation and disinformation about race, we have to rely on data and evidence about racial truths, right? Here are a few historical facts. I'm not a historian, but I know enough about the truth of America's racial history where we really could be here for the remainder of the week, just laying out historical facts about who America is and has been. But in the interest of time, let me give just a few examples, right? Land theft, colonization, and the attempted genocide of indigenous peoples. That happened. That is a fact, right? We cannot abandon the reality that that actually happened to Native peoples, to indigenous peoples. Christopher Columbus did not just stumble upon unoccupied land. There was land theft and attempted genocide of the people who occupied these lands that we now call North America. Fact, the founding fathers were enslavers. I know that we were taught in school to just love and honor and just so appreciate these founding fathers for laying the blueprint of democracy. While they were doing so, they were also enslaving African peoples. Two things can be simultaneously true. George Washington was an enslaver. That is a fact. The Three-Fifths Compromise deemed Black people 3/5 human. So as we think about those documents that declare life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all of these other documents that the founding fathers are credited with creating that, again, set the blueprint of democracy for our nation. We have to be honest that they wrote into those documents that, yeah, Black people aren't fully human. They're 3/5 of a person, right? That's a fact. There were over 400 years of slavery in the United States. Plessy versus Ferguson, that promised separate but equal schooling, nah, that didn't happen. Those schools they were separate, but they were not equal, right? There were exclusionary college admission practices that kept Black people and Latino people and Asian American people and Jewish people and indigenous people out of those colleges and universities. That's a fact. It's also a fact that the historically Black colleges and universities that were created to keep Black folks out of white schools, that those colleges and universities were never equitably funded, ever. From the moment they were created through the present day, those are quantifiable, undeniable, irrefutable facts. I went to an HBCU, I can tell you. It's truth. I've also studied the numbers about the inequities in investments, historically and contemporarily. Those are facts, right? Jim Crow segregation, redlining, and discriminatory housing practices, those are historical facts, people, right? So I think that we have to, as Americans, as citizens, and certainly as educators and educational leaders, we have to put the historical facts on the table. We also have to put the contemporary facts on the table and link them to historical practices of exclusion. What you see here is an illustration of the history of the United States Supreme Court. What you see on the very bottom here is a beautiful illustration of Sister Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first Black woman Supreme Court justice in our nation's history. I offer this as a pictorial fact, if you will, because when Joe Biden announced that his next Supreme Court justice was going to be a Black woman, he, as a white man, was accused of being racist, right? Critics argued that, isn't it racist that he's just going to pick somebody just because they're Black, just because she's a Black woman? Listen, people, when we look at the history of the court, you see it here, right? These are facts that overwhelmingly, almost entirely, the court has been packed with white guys. These are irrefutable facts, right? I do not think that anyone can credibly claim that everybody who's not a white guy is unqualified. Everybody who's not a white guy is not smart. Show me the data on that. There are no data, but these are the data, right? These are irrefutable data that the court has been almost white dudes. There have been 3 Black people, 2 Black guys and a Black woman. There's been one Latina. She's currently on the court. There have been so few women, right? These are facts. Let's get into some other facts. I'm going to take us out of education for a moment and help us think about the larger, factual realities as it pertains to racial inequity. Here, let's rely on Serena Williams to help us understand these larger societal facts about race and racial inequity.
Do you hear me?
Do you hear me?
Or me?
Would you hear me if I want another title?
If I had more diplomas,
if I dressed a certain way.
Would you listen if I was more assertive?
Less assertive?
If I wasn't Black?
if I was older,
Younger?
Thinner?
Louder.
If I wasn't a woman?
If I wasn't a woman?
Do you hear me?
Here's a fact. The Black maternal mortality crisis is a crisis. Pregnancy-related mortality rates among Black and Indigenous women are 3 times and 2 times higher, respectively, compared to white women. That's an irrefutable fact. See the data here. Per 100,000 pregnancies, 41 Black women die, 26 Indigenous women die, 13 white women die. The fact is that physicians and healthcare providers, because of their implicit biases, because of their unwillingness to listen equitably to what Black women and Indigenous women and other women of color are telling them they are experiencing in their pregnancy, they are literally killing these women. These women die in childbirth. Those are facts, right? As a school of education, we have to think not only about the preparation of teachers, counselors, school leaders, higher ed professionals, and so on. We also have to think about the educational preparation of scientists, the educational preparation of doctors and nurses, and how if race is eliminated entirely from the curriculum that prepares them, we in institutions of higher ed become complicit in crises like this one, right? I could go on and on and on and on and on, looking across every industry and every sector of our society and our economy and furnish to you and to critics data like these that are jaw-dropping, painstakingly clear indicators, confirmatory evidence, if you will, that America still has a racial problem. We as educators have to clap back to the critics with data and evidence like these. We also have to clap back with data and evidence about the realities of race in our K-12 schools, as well as on college and university campuses. Let me talk for just a moment about the USC Race and Equity Center's campus racial climate research. I've been a professor now for 20 years. For 18 of those years, I have been continuously engaged in the qualitative study of campus racial climates. So 18 years of qualitative climate studies at 59 colleges and universities across every geographic region across the United States. When I was young and had a lot more time, I would go and do these climate assessments at colleges and universities all by myself. But when I founded the center at Penn 12 years ago, this work became a signature activity of the then Penn Race and Equity Center. So the work typically entails spending 3 or 4 days, usually 4, doing racially homogeneous focus group interviews on a campus. We would sometimes go and assess the climate just for students, other times just for employees, faculty and staff, and administrators. Very rarely what we do faculty, staff, students, right? But the point here is that always, regardless if it was employee focused or student focused, we would go and interview several Black people all together, several Indigenous people, several Asian American and Pacific Islander people, several multiracial people, several Latinx people, and always several white people, and we would do those focus groups, homogeneously, right? Over the years, we have conducted in-person, face-to-face interviews with more than 2,000 faculty members, staff members, and administrators at colleges and universities across the country. Perhaps more impressively, over the years, we have conducted in-person, on campus, not over Zoom, not on the phone, in person, looking people in their faces on their campus, interviews with more than 10,000 students at community colleges and four-year institutions all across the country. So as you might imagine, having interviewed more than 12,000 employees and students, we got the facts on campus racial climate. We have taken what we learned qualitatively over all those years and used it to inform a tool, the design and creation of a tool that is now enabling us to give more facts about campus racial climate to even more higher ed institutions. For those of you who are not familiar, let me introduce you to the National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates.
The National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates, also known as the NAC, is a quantitative survey that will be administered annually at hundreds of participating colleges and universities across the United States. Through the NAC, thousands, perhaps millions, of college students will offer useful insights into the realities and complexities of race in higher education. NAC respondents will help us understand how various populations differently experience the colleges and universities they attend, where and what they learn about race, their feelings of preparedness for citizenship in a racially diverse democracy after college, and how racial issues in our broader society affect interactions and experiences on campuses. The USC Race and Equity Center will help institutional leaders use NAC survey results to improve racial climates, college experiences, and student outcomes.
So you may have noticed that my center colleague in the video was talking in future tense about what the NAC will be and what it will do. We have since launched it. We launched it in February 2019. In its first 2 years, the NAC was administered to more than 500,000 college students at community colleges and four-year institutions all across the United States. As of last summer, the NAC has been now administered to more than 2 million students at colleges and universities in every geographic region of the United States. Last year, we also launched a staff version of the NAC to understand the campus climate as it is experienced by staff members and administrators. This winter, back in January, we launched the faculty version of the NAC. So my point here, right, is that really I could be here all day telling you what we've learned from administering a survey to more than 2 million people and doing interviews with more than 12,000 people. I won't do that in the interest of time. But the point here is that there are facts that confirm that colleges and universities continue to have problems with race, problems with the racial climate, and that these problems are not just reported by students of color and employees of color, but white folks too, through their NAC responses, are making clear that we got a problem here with race. We have some challenges and opportunities in both the climate as well as in the curriculum and in our workplace policies and so on to be better on race and on racial equity. Here's one last fact. The fact is, I wrote this piece in Inside Higher Ed several years ago at this point, I think 2016. The fact is that many administrators actually don't want to know the truth about their campus racial climates, which is why they literally pay us at the center to ignore racism. What do I mean by that? I mean, they pay us to do a qualitative climate assessment, or they pay us to participate in the NAC and then ultimately do nothing with the results, right? That's a fact on way too many campuses, right? That in and of itself is a deliberate act of racism denial. When you have data from a very credible research organization such as ours, from a very credible instrument like the NAC, and you get the data and you do nothing with it, it's a form of racism denial. It is educational malpractice, I argue. All right, look, I could stay here all day just furnishing facts, but that's my first recommendation to you, right? As people in these crazy times are denying that racism exists or it does exist, pull out the facts, right? It's also important, though, I think, to be clear about what is and what isn't happening in K-12 schools and on college campuses. Right. We talked about in the first session that I did on racism denial and what it is. One example is not the only example. I want to be clear about that. One example that I gave was the attacks on critical race theory, right, as a form of racism denial. And to be sure, critical race theory is not being taught in K-12 schools, even though racism deniers are insisting that it is. It ain't. Right. So we got to be clear about what is and what isn't happening. Here, I'm going to show you another quick video clip. Let me set this up for you by just saying to you that critical race theory is now more than 4 decades old. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything more. Here we go.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' administration is now requiring state colleges and universities to tell the state about any
JK, we're going to come back. I want you to keep in the back of your mind. I'm not ready yet for the CRT for more than 40 years old, but let's do hear about what's happening in Florida and how we might speak back to such a thing should it come knocking on our door here in California. I understand that we have OCL students and master's degree students who live outside of California. So some of these attacks are happening in your states right now, right? Okay, here we go. Let's go to Florida.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' administration is now requiring state colleges and universities to tell the state about any resources that are going towards any activities related to diversity, to equity, to inclusion, and to critical race theory. Universities have a week to get the information to them. News4Jax reporter Travis Gibson is joining us now. So one UNF professor is voicing concerns, a lot of concerns about this request. Travis?
Yeah, that's right. It all started when a memo to university leaders went out that outlines all of the areas public schools must give information about, including how much money they spend on these programs. And the University of North Florida professor took to social media today to call the move a clear attempt to undermine academic freedom. Governor Ron DeSantis is asking public universities for details about the costs associated with administering things like DEI activities and any paid positions for those programs. His administration sent this memo to those who oversee the college and university systems last week, saying it is important that we have a full understanding of the operational expenses of state institutions. The governor took aim at ideological issues on campuses during his inauguration speech on Tuesday.
We must ensure school systems are responsive to parents and to students, not partisan interest groups.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll stop there. But the point here is that the governor has required state colleges and universities there in Florida to report what they're doing in the name of DE&I. And currently there is a House bill there in Florida that is attempting to defund ethnic cultural centers, ethnic studies, student of color organizations, historically Black sororities and fraternities. It's a mess, right? So when the governor writes you a memo demanding that you report and catalog all these things that you're spending money on in the name of DE&I, you also have to report back, right? Like what you are and what you are not doing, right? You have to report back. You have to fight back. I would argue fighting back is important, right? Look, as I said at the top of our time together today, I respect that folks are out in the streets protesting right now to get higher compensation in LAUSD. They deserve higher compensation. But just imagine, right, if fed up educators came together and went on strike, right, in response to the overreach and the suppression of teaching the truth about America's racial past and present, right? Imagine if educators, completely different topic, but I feel the exact same way. If educators said enough with the weak legislation on gun control and school shootings, we are not coming back to work until and unless the school board, the superintendent, our local elected officials, our state legislative officials, and the federal government does something in response to mass shootings on school grounds and on college campuses. Just imagine, right? Like, I think that these times require mobilization. They require people to go on strike. They require us to take to the streets in response to the ridiculous assault on people of color and on our democracy, right? Look, that might be too much for some of y'all. You may be scared. Here's what you can do instead, or in addition to. We recently launched, we being the USC Race and Equity Center, 2 weeks ago. My colleague Min Tran has done a spectacular job of leading this new alliance of California State University campuses across the CSU system. Some of you may know that we have a national alliance of 71 liberal arts colleges. We also have an alliance here in California of more than half of the state's community colleges. But we recently launched, under Dr. Tran's leadership, 2 weeks ago, a new CSU Racial Equity Leadership Alliance. Here's just a snapshot from a Padlet that we did during the kickoff session that had faculty members, staff members, and administrators from across the CSUs. We asked them to post, what are you doing to achieve racial equity on your CSU campuses, right? And you can see, this is just a snapshot. If we were on the actual Padlet, we could keep scrolling, like it goes on and on and on and on, right? It's important for us to communicate to misinformed lawmakers and to a misinformed public about what we actually are doing, right? No, you will not see anywhere on this list that we are making white people feel bad and guilty about being white. You will not find anywhere on this list that we have a whole coordinated campaign to teach people of color that they're inferior. That's not it. That's not the project. So I think we have to respond with examples, concrete examples of what we actually are doing at our institutions, both K-12 and higher ed. All right. We also have to be clear about, again, what we aren't doing. This is a Forbes article that I wrote last summer. You see the title here, your company's DEI training isn't critical race theory, no need to ban it. The same is true of your K-12 teacher PD. When we look at the curriculum for PDs, there usually is not a curriculum, by the way. That's a critique that I have of PDs. They tend to be very like one-off and disjointed. A different session for a different time. But when we look at what actually occurs in PD in K-12 schools and districts, it ain't CRT, right? So I think we have to also be clear about what it is and what it isn't. Knock on wood, when all of these ridiculous attacks on CRT started occurring, they started occurring during the Trump administration, and they've continued. Many friends and supporters of our center reached out to me to ask if I was worried and if we were worried. And I was like, no, we sure aren't. Because, listen, I teach CRT in my classroom, but the things that we do for teacher PDs and for higher education professional learning experiences, we're not teaching critical race theory, right? So I think that it's really important to differentiate and disentangle CRT from, again, the engagement of racial topics and an emphasis on racial equity in the work that we do in K-12 schools and higher ed institutions. All right, here we go. Here's where we have to demand the evidence. All right, so let me go back to the setup from 10 minutes ago. All I'm going to say is that critical race theory was created more than 4 decades ago. That's all I'm going to say. Was there an actual proposal that someone was bringing to your school district to teach critical race theory specifically?
The district at which I made internet viral fire was the board voting whether or not to bring CRT in any fashion of it whatsoever into the K-12 curriculum.
Yeah, see, I'm afraid that what was likely happening there is that anything being taught about race and racism in America was being lumped into this bucket called CRT. That is, frankly, disrespectful to the intellectual genius that was Derek Bell, a tenured black male professor at Harvard University. It's disrespectful to Kimberly Crenshaw, a brilliant black woman who is a professor at Columbia University and UCLA Law School, who've been laboring in the trenches for decades on these very important legal concepts and principles. I think it's intellectually lazy and disrespectful to lump anything related to the teaching of race and racism and oppression in our nation into this category of CRT.
But here's your mistake. You're allowing your offense to be based upon the assumption of what the school board was voting on. When you don't know, we just don't know. Nobody is in favor of eliminating teaching history. Nobody that I know. I certainly am not. We definitely need to teach history.
Well, that's what I'm asking. What were you objecting to?
The introduction of critical race theory, as I understand it, and I believe I've got a pretty good understanding of it.
What have you read in critical race theory?
I'm familiar with the founding work done in 1989 at the Critical Race Workshop.
In 1989?
1989. Was it 2001 that Delgado and Stefanik first published critical race theory? I believe it was 2001 it came out. But will you tell me if I've got this right or wrong?
Wrong.
I haven't finished. If an underlying principle being that race is not so much found.
Look, in the interest of time, I'll just stop it there. Look, we have to demand evidence. We have to ask people, like I asked that guy, what have you read? And he was like, oh, yeah, I read the founding documents in 1989. Fool, 1989, like we're 20 years in at that point. What are you talking about? Those are not the founding documents. What are you saying, right? So I think we have to demand evidence. One other thing that happens in that same episode of the show, I asked this guy to give me a list of 50 K-12 teachers who are teaching critical race theory. Not just 50 from your district or 50 from the state in which your district is located, but give me a list of 50 teachers nationally who are teaching critical race theory in K-12 schools. I'll wait. I have not yet gotten any such list from him or anybody else in spaces and places where I've issued that same invitation. Find me 50. Why? Because there aren't 50. Look, we have to also, in addition to demanding evidence, we have to challenge people's logic flaws. In the interest of time, I'm just going to lift up 3 here. I could go on and on, but I won't. Here are 3. I'm gonna lay out 3 facts, and then I'm gonna lay out 3 logic flaws that underlie those facts. Fact 1: nearly 80% of K-12 school teachers are white. And the overwhelming majority of them are white women. So therefore, the logic flaw is that there are a ton of woke white women who are teaching critical race theory to 3rd graders. I don't think so. Second fact, educators tell us in the work that we do in our center, when we're working with teachers, counselors, school leaders, and staff members, K-12 professionals tell us that we don't talk about race in our school. It's uncomfortable for us. We don't know how to do it. It's explosive. At best, we talk around it. Michael Pollock's research also talks about, in her book, Color Mute, talks about how K-12 educators very skillfully talk around race, but not about it. That has been corroborated over and over and over and over again in our work on the ground. We're not telling you what we heard. We're telling you what we know from being in schools with actual educators and administrators. So they tell us, yeah, no, we don't talk about race. So then are you suggesting that people who don't know how to talk about race with each other are teaching it in their classrooms to students? Probably not. Okay, here's the last fact. Teachers and school leaders tell us that they learned very little about race in their teacher education programs, in their principal certification programs, and in their EDD programs that prepared them for the superintendency and other administrative roles. They learned very little in schools of education about race and racial equity and other racial topics. So then here's the logic flaw. The educators are teaching something that they never learned. Probably not, right? In all three of these logic flaws, we have to demand evidence from DeSantis and other critics who are making these baseless, unfounded claims, right? It just doesn't add up. The math ain't mathin' on these, right? Okay. Look, I want to leave some time for at least a question at the end. So let me see if I can go a little bit faster. I talked earlier about how we have to amplify the consequences of racism denial. When we were together last month, Professor Sinatra, Dean Noguera, and I talked about the larger social consequences and the consequences to our democracy of both racism denial and science denial. I just want to double back here. I want to just like double click on how amplifying those consequences can be a way of responding to the attacks on teaching the truth about America's racial past and present. Look, there's this Teaching Hard History report. It's a good report produced by the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2018. They found in their analyses, in their surveying, that only 8% of high school seniors across the United States can identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. 92%, in other words, 92% of high school students, seniors, we ain't talking about first-year students, we're talking seniors. 92% of seniors believe that the Civil War was about something else. It wasn't about slavery. When we send miseducated people into the world, not sufficiently schooled in America's racial past, they are guaranteed to repeat the same mistakes, right? That undermined democracy, justice, freedom, and all of those other ideals. Historically, they're destined to repeat those things in their various industries. And it's our fault if we succumb to the ridiculousness and we just give up. Like, well, we can't teach this stuff. Well, when we do that, we then become complicit in the exacerbation of racism across every sector and facet of our society, in every industry, including our own. Look, let's talk about the consequences quickly for teachers, for educators. You see this LA Times article from a few years ago, 2019. How did 4 smiling teachers end up posing with a noose? This literally happened in Palmdale. Palmdale is in Los Angeles County, by the way. I'm not talking about Palmdale, Mississippi. I'm talking about Palmdale, California, which is in Los Angeles County. My PhD student, Rossier PhD student, James Bridgeforth, and I also published a piece about it in Ed Week. And we said, listen, as we watched the video and we saw the photos, the news coverage of these 4 teachers posing and smiling with a noose. By the way, I forgot to mention that the principal was the photographer. The principal of Summerwind Elementary School in Palmdale, California, took this picture of these 4 teachers smiling with a noose, right? Yeah, I suppose if you were never taught in school, like the significance of lynching and a noose, how the hell else would you know that this is not okay? How would you know? Is one argument that James and I made in our Ed Week response. But we also said, yeah, we're not, so we weren't surprised by the news on this. Why? Yeah, because it happens everywhere. Listen, here's some educator consequences. When a white teacher at Hoover High School in Alabama heard students listening to Tupac's song, Dear Mama, she told them to turn the nigger tunes off. A teacher. I believe this is in 2016, 17. This literally happened. A teacher who is white told the Black students, turn the nigger tunes off. Okay. In October 2018, news broke about a white Cincinnati principal who was using the N-word in a staff meeting and said it 3 additional times in conversations with Black students. In the staff meeting, when he used it the first time, colleagues of his was like, principal, you shouldn't use the N-word. No, don't do that. No, you don't want to do that. This fool then tripled down in his interactions with students. He was using the N-word. Listen, we're running out of time. I'm gonna keep going. In October 2018, a white elementary school teacher in Iowa wore blackface to a Halloween party. The photos emerged of her on social media. This is your daughter's teacher on Facebook in blackface, right? Like, imagine if you're the parent and you see your daughter's teacher on Facebook in blackface. Okay, well, shit, I suppose this is my second cuss word, I'm gonna stop, the dean is here. But like if you don't know historically or even contemporarily, like why blackface is offensive, I guess you're gonna go to your Halloween party in blackface, I guess. Yeah, then there was this. These are teachers at a school in Idaho. This is Halloween. So some of you may be like, it's Halloween. One is dressed like a piñata and the others are wearing sombreros. Like, what's the big deal here? Yeah, in the same Halloween party for educators, you see that they made a makeshift wall here that says "Make America Great Again." You see they were keeping out the Mexicans from crossing the border wall. These are educators, right? Okay. January 2019, a white teacher in Carmichael, California, dressed in blackface, not for a Halloween party, but instead for a lesson at school. The teacher was saying her rationale was that she was teaching a lesson in a particular moment in history and time, and she wanted to embody the moment and embody the people that she was teaching about. So she decided that she was going to be in blackface. The principal simply deemed it poor judgment in his memo to the district. In 2019, in Westchester, New York, teachers singled out Black students and cast them as slaves in a mock auction as part of a social studies lesson. Look, as we think about the consequences of racism denial, let's not just think about it for our democracy and our society and for the professions outside of education. Let's also think about what the consequences are for those who eventually grow up to become teachers, when they don't know better because they weren't taught better, because the teaching of these things was outlawed, banned, deemed, whatever, unteachable. All right, listen, let me conclude here by inviting you to take advantage of the USC Race and Equity Center's forthcoming tools. We're developing these tools as fast as we can, so hang tight. Lori Patton Davis is my best friend. She's a professor at Ohio State University. She and I are hard at work on co-designing what we're calling the National Truth Teaching Campaign. You all heard me talk about it in one of the previous masterclass sessions, so I won't go in deep on it. But this is a campaign where we're developing digital media materials, posters, T-shirts, banners, hats, buttons for educators, for parents and family members, and for children. There's one, Teach Me the Truth. That's for kids. There's another one, Don't Lie to Me. That's for kids, right? So we're hoping to activate literally millions of people all across the United States, millions, and equip them with campaign assets that they can use to resist racism denial and to insist on teaching the truth about America's racial past and present. With the generous support of the Spencer Foundation, I'm announcing here publicly for the first time. This just happened a couple weeks ago. So Spencer Foundation has awarded the USC Race and Equity Center a grant to create what we're calling the National DEI Defense Commission. It will be a commission of 20 experts. By the way, this was Dean Nogueira's idea. I just gave it a fancy title and wrote the proposal, and he and I together closed the deal with the foundation. So thank you, Pedro. But yes, we're calling it the National DEI Defense Commission. It's a commission of 20 highly respected experts, not just people who study race and study what's happening in education, but these are also folks who design and deliver professional development for school districts, for example, and for higher ed institutions. We're between now and the end of July, we will be impaneling this commission. We're going to bring the commissioners here to the USC Race and Equity Center here to Los Angeles for 4 days, and they're going to collaboratively do the following. They're going to develop evidence-based response toolkits for each of the following 4 groups. 1 for teachers, 1 for administrators and school board leaders, 1 for parents and family members, and 1 for legislators. There will be a separate toolkit for each of those groups. Notice that I said evidence-based response toolkits. So within each toolkit, there are going to be evidence-based fact sheets, infographics, conversations, guides, and so on. When they say this, you say this back, right? For example, in each of the 4 toolkits. Second, while we have them here in Los Angeles, we are going to take advantage of our amazing friendship with the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism here at USC and use their studio space to produce 10 digital shorts. These will be 2 to 3 minute short videos with the experts in which the commissioners are countering misinformation and disinformation about what is and what is not occurring in K-12 classrooms and on college campuses across the country. So imagine Gloria Ladson-Billings on a video making clear what is and what is not happening. She would know. Even as a retired person, she is still very much in schools all the time doing professional learning and professional development. She and the 19 other commissioners will be in the Annenberg studios making these videos that we'll be disseminating. Third, the commissioners will be reaching consensus on what high quality diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development activities include, effective ways to facilitate these experiences for educators, and rigorous ways to measure their impact. And they'll be developing guide sheets for people who are designing and delivering PD and professional learning in K-12 schools and in post-secondary institutions to ensure, right, that those things are defensible, that they're high quality, that they're evidence-based. Right. And lastly, the commissioners will be crafting truth-teaching pledges for millions of citizens to sign. One version of the pledge will be for educators who vow to teach the truth about America's racial past and present. Another will be a pledge for parents and family members who insist on having their children learn the truth. And a third will be for students themselves who call on educators to teach them the truth. So we plan to produce all of these assets with the funding from Spencer Foundation by the end of July and make them publicly available to the nation, obviously including to folks here in our Brasserie community by the end of August. All right, everybody, that's what I have. Those are all the ideas that I have about what to do about racism denial. I think it is 4:57. We have time for a question. Sorry that ran so long. I had a lot to say.
Well, let's thank Dr. Harper first for that incredible presentation, so thorough. Thank you particularly for those the work you're going to continue to do to address this issue. and we appreciate that. Kanae, do we have time to take at least one or two questions?
Yeah, you can take as many as you like, Sean. They're in your chat box. I've been sending them to you while you were giving that amazing presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kanae and Dean Nogueira. Wait, so am I supposed to just go into the chat and just pick one?
Sure. Or do you want me to read one to you? You can do that as well.
Sure. Listen, I'm gonna go with one here. What's my advice on approaching racism denial in bite-sized ways? Perhaps suggestions for micro responses. Okay. Let me just say, right, that DeSantis et al. Are not issuing their assaults on truth teaching and racism denial in small doses, right? They're shoving it down our throats by the gallons. So I, on the one hand, appreciate the question, but on the other hand, I'm going to argue that the urgency of the moment requires big, bold actions that are done in coalition, right? Okay, so in terms of like bite-sized things, tweet every day. Tweet a fact or post to your Instagram or your TikTok or your Facebook every day a fact about race or racism or racial inequity in K-12 schools and higher ed institutions and our broader society. That's one minor thing, one micro thing that could make a big difference. You would be teaching the public by doing so. Yeah, so post on your social media platform of choice every day a fact about racial inequity. All right, Kanae, I think we have time for maybe one more. Maybe I should have let you, had you rather pick one. All right. I'm just going to pick one here. What is your reaction and counter response to the theories and pushback narratives of conservative Black, anti-racism intellectuals? And some names are called here, including John McWhorter, whom Dean Nogueira has debated. That's great. Look, listen. I think it is important for us to acknowledge that not all of the racism deniers are white. Some of them are Black, some of them are Latinx, some of them are Asian American and Pacific Islander and Indigenous and multiracial. So let's make sure we put that on the table. So I would say that my approach is the same. I don't care what the race of the racism denier is. I'm going to pull out these same tools, methodologies, facts, and resources to speak back and clap back. You know, like that guy that I was on the Dr. Phil show with, who was talking about critical race theory, was created in 1989 and the first book was published in 2000. Listen, I didn't care that that dude was Black. I was like, listen, I'm going to correct the misinformation here, regardless of the fact that he and I both are Black men. So I think that we have to have that, we ought to have the same standard and approach, regardless of the race of the racism denier. All right, everybody. Sorry I didn't leave time for more questions, but this has been really an honor. Again, Dean Nogueira, to have been invited by you to do this. And thank you to all of the members of our community, our Rasir community, on behalf of Professor Sinatra and myself. We've loved being with you, and we hope that this series has been useful to you.
Thank you, Professor Harper, and thank you for closing us out for this semester's masterclass. I want to thank everybody who joined us online, let you know that all of these sessions are being recorded, and you'll have access to them through our website. So have a great evening, and once again, thank you, Dr. Harper, for such an enlightening presentation.
My pleasure. Fight on.